we actually make up everything in the sense all these theories are made up by us, but in these theories we place the parts, we may either place the parts as fundamental or the whole as fundamental. Now the quantum mechanics is placing the whole as fundamental. That's, I think, the most basic change it makes, right? Finally, every theory is made up by us, and we are going to see whether we can apply it coherently to reality. You see that I think we could make an infinity of different kinds of theories, and some of them would be more coherent than others. You see, for example, if somebody is said to be mentally disturbed, he has another theory which we think is incoherent, but to him it looks coherent, right? Because we can always ignore what is not working, you see. Or we say we'll solve that later.
You just said that in reality we make it all up, not just the parts, but also the wholes. Could you explain?
Well, I think that's the question. What is the relationship of theory to reality, you see? Now, one view is that it reflects reality, you see. Now, that I think that it corresponds to reality. I think that view is only limited, right? Like a map is said to correspond to a city, but there's nothing on the map that corresponds to anything in the city. In the map you see dots of print, and the city, which is very vaguely defined, the city is also vaguely defined. So what corresponds is certain abstractions that we abstract. Right? But the map, the real test of the map is that it guides us correctly in the city. And if it's a wrong map, we will find incoherence, right, in our action. Right? Now,
but it's not that you can compare this bit of the map with this bit of the
well,
city.
only in a rough sense, but that's an abstraction. You can compare it, but it's abstract. Right? Now, you see, so therefore we make it all up, but the question is how coherent is it when we try to make it work? You see, that's really the key. Some theories are more coherent than others, but it's often hard to tell because when we come to a theory as broad as a worldview, we find it very hard to detect incoherence because the worldview tends to state that things that don't fit are irrelevant, or else says we're going to get them in order later. We haven't solved that problem yet. So incoherence can easily be not noticed, right? But if people are and also people would like not to have their worldviews questioned, because they have got used to them and feel comfortable with them. So therefore, it's very hard to question a worldview.
But in effect, that's what you are doing.
Yeah.
And in effect, you are questioning the whole Western worldview.
Yes. Well, yes. I think even all the worldviews need to be questioned: the Eastern and the Western. See, the West has, in a sense, implicitly questioned the Eastern worldview. Every worldview, I think, is limited, but I think the Western worldview, its limits have not been seen. And we need to go to a broader view, not necessarily back to the Eastern, though it may include some of the Eastern. But I think we need a kind of dialogue of these worldviews to go to something beyond, right?
Where do you see the limits of the Western worldview?
Well, just in the way of saying that it focuses too much on analysis, and it tends to lead to fragmentation, you see. Now, what I mean by fragmentation is not just division, distinction, but because the parts in the whole are correlative concepts. You see, a part is a part only because it's part of a whole, like a machine or a watch, right? Now, a fragment is something it means break it up, you see. That's the root of the word, to smash, right? So if you smashed a watch, you would get fragments. Now, the Western view, it aims at getting the true parts of the universe, but in some ways, perhaps it gets fragments, not to some extent in physics, but much more so in fields like biology, psychology, sociology, and so on. Right? Now, if you break it up falsely into fragments, then you have confused. You see, you're going to treat these as separate when they're not, and also you're going to unite what's in the fragment when it's not united, right? So it leads to confusion.
So in the West, you tend to confuse the part for the whole and vice versa?
Yeah, you get confused about the part and the whole because you take a fragment as an independent whole.
But if you take the true whole that includes everything, it would also include you and include your perception of the whole.
Yes.
So could you ever tell me your way of perceiving the whole to anyone else?
Well, we can have a dialogue and begin to exchange, you see. In other words, I can't tell you unless we're talking together. You see, we have to exchange our views on that, right? And perhaps now, And then there comes the problem that people are ready to listen to somebody else's worldview, you see, seriously, without resistance, without opposition. But I think the observer is an intrinsic part of the whole. That's what quantum mechanics is teaching us too in physics, right? That the observing instrument is just as much part of the whole, and therefore, because of the possibility of these non-local interactions in quantum mechanics, when an observation is made, the two systems are not really distinct, you see. Therefore, they participate in each other, and you cannot therefore get an unambiguous meaning to the measurement, right? The same happens between human beings. You see that if somebody tries to measure somebody else, talk to him, there's a mutual change which makes it impossible to get an unambiguous attribution of qualities.
It's not possible to say what David Bohm would have said in another interview.
No.
Tomorrow at the same time.
No, because we're participating together, so what I am is affected by what you're doing and what you are, and vice versa, right? That's exactly the sort of thing that happens in quantum mechanical observations.
Okay, if I say then that when I think about the whole and the part, I end up understanding that if you understand the whole, you're not able to tell it to anyone else because then you step out of the whole and become a part.
Well, I think there's a kind of communication. See, this is the point about having a different worldview. There is a kind of communication that does not begin by denying wholeness, you see. You see, if we say, here am I and here are you, and then we have already divided it, right? But perhaps we could communicate in the spirit of the whole without assuming that division, right? See, we're not trying to tell, that means I'm not trying to tell you what I think, you not trying to tell me, but rather together we are trying to discover how we're going to think together. Do you see the difference?
Indeed. Is that possible in ordinary language?
Yes, I think it is. It depends on the attitude rather than the language. Our language has been developed so as to emphasize the part, but we can still use it differently. I say, for example, poetry uses language differently, and it is always possible to use language in new ways.
So the basic obstacle is more the attitude of the people involved than the theoretical or verbal.
Yes, we could improve the language. Maybe someday it will improve in that regard, but we can proceed without that.
Now, this attitude problem of discussing the wholeness would then couple to the question of whether the new worldview is something that you are forced to take on or something that you wish to take on.
Well, I don't think you're forced ever to take on a worldview. Finally, in fact, you see, if you take the medieval worldview, it would probably seem perfectly satisfying to those people. Whatever wasn't fitting, they said, well, we don't quite understand it, or God, well, that's the mystery of God, or whatever, you see. There are things in our worldview we don't understand. The favorite answer is to say science will explain it later, you see. Now, you can't be forced to have a worldview. You can merely say that the evidence is such that you are convinced, you see, and and that it seems coherent to you.
But the psychological attitude towards a new worldview could either be one of that you feel happy that you're liberated, or that you feel that your old worldview crumbles.
Yes, you may want to cling on to your old worldview, or you may feel happy that you're free of it, you see. And I think that people are becoming less satisfied with the old worldview today, generally speaking, that they're not satisfied with this fragmentary view because it has led to so many problems, so much incoherence in the human relationships in society, and with the ecology and so on. You see, that, for example, this fragmentary view has led to treating the whole Earth as a bit of fragments to be exploited. Now, that all adds up in the whole to this destruction going on, you see. So as long as we think that way, it will probably go on, you see. People may take a fragmentary approach to repairing the ecology, but it won't work, right? Because that is a situation where the analysis into parts is not relevant, you see. They're not sufficiently independent to allow for such analysis.
So really what you've seen in the